Hello, and today I'm repainting this Snow White doll to look like Valak, the nun from the Conjuring 2. I'm super excited to see how it turns out. First, I start off by removing her original paint with an acetone-based nail polish remover. Now that all of her paint is removed, I use a plastic wrap and some tape to protect her hair before I put on the sealant. So now that her hair is completely covered, I use a Mod Podge-based clear sealant, which came out a little glossy even though it said it was matte, but that's okay. Now I'm using a mechanical pencil to sketch on the basic shape of her eyes. After I've sketched out the basic shape of her eyes, off camera I use tack glue to build up her cheeks and her nose to make her look more like the nun and less like Snow White. Also off camera, I decided to paint on the basic shape of her eyes with white acrylic paint. This is because I wanted to get her eyes as symmetrical as I possibly could get them. Now I'm going in with a skin-toned acrylic paint and I'm just sponging it on her face. After that, I'm going in with a slightly lighter skin-toned color just to add texture to her face and give her a little bit more depth. Now that all that's dry, it's time to start on the eyes, and the first one went on very well. It was perfect. The second one, not so much. It was a lot of trial and error and a lot of erasing and redoing it and having the eye be too big or too small, but eventually I got it to where I wanted it to, and it turned out pretty well. So once I'm done coloring her eyes the light green, I decide to outline them with a darker green just to make them pop a little bit more. And after this, it is time for the pupils. As you can see, they're a little indented, and that's because I wanted them to be as straight as possible. Now I'm going in with a black acrylic paint and just outlining her eyes. Now it is time to line the veins on her face. I'm using a watered-down black acrylic to do this. As I'm lining the veins in her face, I'm also outlining her nose, filling in her nostrils, all that fun stuff. I'm also going in with the same watered-down black acrylic to smoke and blend out the eyes just a little bit more. I'm also doing the same thing to the mouth as well, getting the frown that I want, and now I'm going in with a white acrylic and just sponging it all over her face. So now, after this dries, I go in with a lime green color and I just sponge it on the places of her face that I really want to pop out. And this tone is just supposed to be an undertone, so you're not going to see it as well as you're seeing it now. After I go in with that sponge, I go in with a clean, wet sponge just to blend it out even more. Now I'm going back in with the white acrylic paint and just sponging it over the green and other places of the face just so the green doesn't look so bright. And I'm also going in with the white acrylic and painting in the highs of her face, so her forehead and her cheekbones. Now the white is done, and after doing all that work to paint on the veins, they're missing. So now I'm using a gray acrylic paint to outline the lines of the face once again. Now I'm going back in with a black acrylic paint to outline the veins once again and fill in the nostrils of the nose. I also decided to go back over the eyes once again, but the black was a little too dark for now, so I erased it and I went in with a gray instead, just so I could get the shape that I wanted without it being too dark. Now that that's dry, I'm going back over it with a watered-down black acrylic. I'm also outlining the mouth once again, and I'll go over that in gray as well. I'm basically multitasking at this point, so once an eye is dry, I go back over it, then the mouth's dry, I'll go back over that, just so I can get everything done in a timely manner because I like to work very quickly. Now that the mouth is all fanned out, it is time for the contour. I'm going in with a gray acrylic paint and sponging it on just like I did the green before, and I'm going back over it with a clean, wet sponge to blend it out. Now I'm just going back over her contour with a slightly darker gray and just doing the same thing I did before. Now that her contour is finished, I want to add more texture to her face, so I'm using some watered-down acrylic paints with black, gray, and white, and I'm just sprinkling it all over her face. If some pieces are a little too big, I'm going back in with a wet sponge and just cleaning it up a bit. Now I'm going in with some watered-down white acrylic to re-highlight her forehead and her cheekbones. I'm also going in with just a wet brush to clean up her eyes. Now I'm using a black acrylic and I'm just sponging it over her mouth and her eyes to make them darker and a little more messy. Now her look is almost complete. I'm just going back over the highs of her face with some white acrylic paint to highlight them even more. Now it is finally time to move on to the eyes. For this, I'm using a bunch of different alcohol-based markers to add more shadow to the eyes and just make them look more realistic. If you want to pause the video to see the colors that I use, feel free to do so. What I'm using is just grays, warm grays. I'm also using a couple different pinks to add more pink to the inner corners of the eyes. I'm also using the gray alcohol markers to go back over the nose and the veins on the face that we covered up yet again with the white acrylic paint. The eyes are almost done. All I'm doing is going in with a clear alcohol marker to clean up the whites of the eyes because they were a little darker than I had wanted them to be. I'm also outlining the eyes once again with a black alcohol marker. And now, after one last clear coat, her face is all done but it is a little shiny, so I'm using some powder to try to mattify the face. And even after that, it still was more shiny than I had wanted it to be. So I'm going to go back over it with some tack glue because I know that it dries matte, and I really just want her face to be as matte as I possibly can get it to be so that her eyes will pop even more. Now that the tack glue is all dry, I'm going over her eyes with a clear gloss to make them look shiny and believable. Once her eyes are dry, it is time to move on to the hair. At the bottom of her hair, it was really matted, and I tried as hard as I could to save it, but in the end, I just had to cut it off. I'm cutting it this way so that when it lays flat, it is more layered and it's not just a straight cut. And I know, it looks very, very choppy, but I promise you, I cleaned it up in the end. I also used a straightener to straighten her hair, and I used some warm water to help it lay flat just a little more. Now it is time for the final reveal, costume and all, and I am really happy with how Valak turned out. She looks so creepy. If you have any suggestions for what I should do next, let me know, but for now, I'll see you later.